We wake up every morning with a sense of I, a sense that I choose what to do next, that I decide to wake up, to brush my teeth, to make that cup of coffee, to take that road instead of another, to speak or to remain silent, and we carry this sense of freedom everywhere we go, as if we are captains of our own little ships navigating the ocean of existence. Yet when you sit quietly and actually feel your own thoughts, you begin to notice that many of your choices seem to arise before you even feel the intention to choose, as if there were a subtle script already playing under the surface of awareness. And the more deeply we turn this question over, do we truly have free will? The more subtle and unsettling the answer becomes, because free will in the everyday sense means that at any moment you could have done otherwise, and yet every decision you have ever made, every yes and every no, appears to be connected in an unbroken chain of causes and conditions that stretch far away into your past, into your upbringing, into culture, into genes, into the very structure of the universe itself. And this view, called determinism, suggests that every event, including the thoughts and decisions in your mind, may itself be the result of prior events and natural laws, such that given the state of the universe at any earlier point, only one possible future could follow, and there is no gap in between, no space for some magical, uncaused choices to arise, because the way things are at one moment already determines what will happen next, just as the next moment of a river's flow is shaped by the water, the riverbed, and the slope that came before. Now, this account sounds bleak to many, because if determinism is true, if every action, every thought, every impulse is merely the inevitable consequence of what came before, then it seems to strip us of the very sense of freedom we feel in our bones. And with that strip away responsibility, moral praise or blame, the idea of self-growth, and even the everyday story we tell ourselves that I chose this and not that. In which case, many people feel as if life becomes a kind of cosmic script already written from start to finish. And yet the conversation is not so simple, because there are many ways to interpret what it means to be determined, and different thinkers approach this in different ways, just as there are many ways a river can be described, as water flowing, as molecules moving under gravity, as a beautiful natural feature in a landscape, or as a metaphor for change and impermanence. And none of these is wrong. They are just perspectives. One of the puzzles in this conversation is that our subjective experience, the feeling that I could have done otherwise, that I am choosing this moment, this word, this action, is vivid and undeniable. And in daily life, it is the foundation of how we hold people accountable, how we praise someone for kindness and blame someone for cruelty, and how we feel pride or shame for what we do. And yet some philosophers have argued that this feel of freedom is not enough to prove that freedom itself exists in the metaphysical sense. Because if every moment of choice arises from conditions that were never in our control, our genes, our upbringing, our socioeconomic environment, the physical state of our brain at that precise moment, then that feeling of free will might simply be a byproduct of how our brains work, a kind of useful illusion that helps us function in society, but not a fundamental feature of reality. And this is what some thinkers who are called hard determinists actually mean when they say that free will is an illusion, that what we call choices are themselves the inevitable results of prior causes and could not have been otherwise. But it is also true that not all thinkers agree with this stark conclusion. In fact, many people find ways to hold on to a sense of freedom even within a deterministic framework, a position known as compatibilism, which suggests that free will and determinism are not logically incompatible, and that even if our desires and decisions have causes, if we act according to our own motives and reasons, rather than being coerced by external force, then in a meaningful sense we are still free. Not free in some mystical sense of being uncaused by anything, but free in the sense that what we do genuinely arises from who we are, including our values, our character, and our deliberations. To see how this might feel in everyday life, imagine two people in almost identical circumstances who react differently when faced with a challenge. One chooses generosity, the other chooses self-interest. And even though both grew up in similar environments, their unique histories, their emotional patterns, and their moment-to-moment awareness shaped how they responded. And, in the compatibilist view, this is an expression of freedom, because the action truly aligns with their inner dispositions and conscious motives. Not because it was uncaused, but because it was owned by the self in the sense that it was not compelled externally, but was integrated with the person's sense of identity, values, and reason. Yet, even this more generous conception of freedom still leaves many questions hovering undisturbed. Because if someone grows up in a harsh environment with limited choices, particular beliefs ingrained by culture, religion, or family, then it becomes difficult to see how anything like pure free will could operate independently of these formative causes, for the very possibility of choice is shaped by what one has learned, what one desires, what one fears, what one believes is possible, and all of these are themselves effects of earlier causes. And so the debate between free will and determinism often turns not on what freedom feels like, but on what kind of freedom is meaningful, the narrow sense of being uncaused, or the broader sense of acting according to one's own reasons and character, whatever the causes that shape them. Imagine, for a moment, two children raised in different families, one in a peaceful home where curiosity is encouraged, and the other in a home where fear was normal and punishment was frequent. And later in life, when both face a decision about how to treat someone in need, the first might act with compassion, while the second might act with suspicion, not because one possesses something mystical and the other does not, but because their histories shaped what they perceive as possible and what they value. And in such a world, the question of free will becomes not simply whether choices are uncaused, but whether a person's decisions arise from their own inner life, their experiences, their growth, their awareness, even if those themselves have roots in the past. And what matters for how we live is less whether decisions are metaphysically free in an uncaused sense, and more whether we can look at the chain of causes and genuinely feel that what we do reflects who we are. This tension between feeling free and knowing oneself as part of a chain of causes is precisely the territory that thinkers like Alan Watts love to explore, because life often feels like a dance between necessity and possibility, between the forces that shaped us and the moment we call choice. And in this dance we find confusion, meaning, responsibility, and sometimes peace. And even though the idea of determinism can feel intimidating, as if it shrinks our moral life or diminishes our sense of agency, another way to look at it is to see it as a reminder that we are not isolated atoms making choices in a vacuum, but participants in a vast web of causes and conditions that connect us to everything else. And this sense of connection is not a cage, but a context in which our sense of self can become more humble, compassionate, and aware rather than frantic, defensive, and proud. In everyday life, we act as if we have free will because we experience our choices. We remember deciding to do one thing and not another, and we feel the weight of that decision in our bodies and minds. But a deeper reflection shows us that even this experience might be like a storyteller who only sees one side of the tapestry, unaware that long strands of thread from the past, from genetics, from culture, from upbringing, and from random events are woven through it. And yet this does not mean the experience is worthless. It means it is a story, a narrative we live inside, not something separate from us. And the richness, pain, joy, and sorrow of that story is real in the sense that it shapes our inner life, even if it arises within a causal framework that extends beyond any single moment of decision. Consider how you choose what to eat for lunch. You decide because you feel hungry, because you like certain flavors, because your culture taught you what is food and what is comfort, because your body needs energy, and because you just finished a stressful conversation that changed your mood. All these causes swirl together, and yet no matter how many causes are involved, your choice still matters to you. And this demonstrates what compatibilists claim, that freedom is not about breaking the chain of causation altogether, but about acting in harmony with one's own nature and reasons, moment by moment. And this kind of freedom is experienced concretely in life, even if it is embedded in a larger causal tapestry. But there are other views too. Hard incompatibilists argue that whether determinism is true or false, the kind of ultimate moral responsibility that requires being the originator of one's actions simply doesn't exist, because no one is ultimately responsible for the way they are, and without being ultimately responsible for oneself. It's incoherent to claim true freedom. And although this sounds like a challenge to moral life, some thinkers reply that moral life is not predicated on metaphysical metaphors of freedom, but on relationships, accountability, empathy, and shared practices that arise in social contexts where people act as if they have choices and hold each other responsible in meaningful ways. And this perspective transforms the debate from an abstract metaphysical puzzle into a question about how we want to live together, how we interpret blame and praise, and how we respond to human behavior in ways that nurture compassion rather than punishment. And so the question, do you actually have free will, is not a question that yields a single clear answer, but it is an invitation to explore the nature of your own life, your own sense of agency, your own experience of choosing, and to notice the way every decision you make comes out of a complex interplay of causes while still feeling like a choice that matters deeply to you. And perhaps the real wisdom here is something like this. We do not need to know whether free will exists in a metaphysical sense in order to live as if our choices matter, to take responsibility for our actions, to cultivate compassion, to understand ourselves and others, and to participate in the unfolding of life with awareness, curiosity, and care. Because even if our actions are woven into a causal tapestry that stretches back to the beginning of time, we still experience them as ours. We still feel their impact in our lives, and we still grow, change, regret, learn, and transform through them. And in that lived experience, there is a kind of freedom that does not depend on breaking the chains of causality, but on understanding them, accepting them, and engaging with them consciously, moment after moment. Thank you, and subscribe for more.